The dog had drawn blood 3 times in 6 weeks. 2 trainers with stitched forearms. 1 handler with a torn calf that would leave a permanent scar. Now the Belgian Malinois stood rigid in the courtyard of the Veterans Administration Rehabilitation Facility, teeth bared, muscles coiled, as Dr. Helen Chun approached with the sedation kit. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete, and somewhere a flag snapped against its pole in the autumn wind. Nobody moved, nobody breathed, because everyone knew what came after the sedation. What they did not know, what nobody standing in that courtyard could possibly know, was that the homeless man watching from behind the dumpster had trained this dog 7 years ago, had trained his handler, and knew exactly why the animal that once saved 17 American lives had become something even the bravest trainers feared to approach. Rex. That was the name stenciled on his tactical vest, faded now from years of deployment dust and Afghan sun. Sergeant Rex, military working dog number 4721, recipient of the Purple Heart, credited with 847 explosive detections across 4 combat deployments. The most decorated canine in his unit's history. 6 months ago, he had been the pride of the K9 program, a legend among handlers, a dog whose instincts had pulled entire squads back from IED kill zones before anyone else sensed danger. Now he stood in a VA courtyard with foam flecking his muzzle, growling at the veterinarian who had been called to end his life. Dr. Chun took another step forward. The needle in her hand caught the light. "Get on with it." The voice came from behind her, sharp and impatient. Captain Wade Prescott stood with his arms crossed, his security uniform pressed to knife-edge precision, watching the scene with something that looked almost like satisfaction. "I told you 3 weeks ago this animal was dangerous. Should have put him down then. Would have saved us all this drama." Dr. Chun did not turn around. Her focus remained on Rex, on the way his hackles stood rigid along his spine, on the low rumble building in his chest. "Easy, boy," she murmured. "Easy. I'm not going to hurt you." But she was. Everyone in that courtyard knew she was. The sedation was just the first step. After that would come the final injection, the one that would stop that legendary heart forever. Aggressive, they had written in his file. Uncontrollable, dangerous to staff and patients. Recommended for immediate euthanasia. Prescott checked his watch. "We have got a facility to run here, doctor." The man had been pushing for this outcome since the first incident, since Rex had lunged at a young orderly who had tried to take his food bowl. The bowl that still had his handler's name written on the bottom in faded marker. Staff Sergeant Elijah Torres. The name of the man who had died in Helmand Province 6 months ago, while Rex watched, while Rex howled, while Rex tried to drag his handler's body to safety until the medics pulled him away. Nobody had explained that to Rex. Nobody had told him why Torres never came back, why the hands that fed him changed, why the voice that commanded him fell silent. All the dog knew was absence, loss, a grief so deep it had nowhere to go but outward, toward anyone who tried to fill the space his handler had left behind. From behind the dumpster at the edge of the parking lot, an old man watched. His clothes hung loose on a frame that had once been powerful, his beard was streaked with gray, and his hands, scarred across the knuckles in ways that told their own story, gripped the rusted metal edge as he leaned forward to see. He had been living behind this facility for almost 2 years now, sleeping in the alcove between the dumpster and the back fence where the security cameras did not reach. Most of the staff knew he was there. Most of them looked the other way. But Captain Prescott had tried to have him removed 4 times, had called the police twice, had made it his personal mission to clear what he called the trash from VA property. The old man's eyes never left the dog. A young orderly named Nina stood near the facility's back in trance, her tablet clutched to her chest, watching the scene unfold with growing distress. She had been the one to feed Rex for the past month, sliding his bowl through the kennel door with hands that trembled, speaking softly to him even when he would not meet her eyes. She had seen the way he slept facing the door Torres used to enter, waiting for footsteps that would never come. She had found him once with his nose pressed against Torres's old bandana, the one still tied to his collar, the one that carried a scent fading more each day. "This is wrong," she whispered, but nobody heard her. Dr. Chun was 3 feet away now. Rex's growl had risen to something between a snarl and a scream, a sound of pure anguished fury that echoed off the concrete walls. The veterinarian's hand was steady, her face composed, but her eyes held a grief that matched the dog's. She had seen his record. She knew what he had done, what he had been, the lives he had saved. And she knew that none of that mattered now. The syringe rose. Rex lunged, and from behind the dumpster, the old man stepped into the light and spoke a single word in a language none of them understood. Aram. His voice was hoarse from disuse, barely above a whisper, but it carried across the courtyard like a command from another world. The dog froze. His entire body went rigid, then soft, the aggression draining out of him like water from a broken vessel. He dropped his belly. He whimpered. And then, as everyone watched in stunned silence, he began to crawl toward the homeless man with his ears flat against his skull and his tail tucked low, the posture of a dog greeting his master after far too long apart. What the hell? Prescott's voice broke the silence, sharp with confusion and something darker. His hand moved toward his radio. Who is this man? Someone grab him. He is trespassing on federal property. But nobody moved, because they had all seen what just happened. They had all watched an uncontrollable animal, a dog scheduled for death, transform in an instant at the sound of a stranger's voice. Dr. Chen lowered the syringe. Her eyes moved from Rex to the old man, now kneeling in the courtyard, his scarred hands extended, the dog pressing against him with a desperate need that made Nina's throat tighten. "How did you do that?" the veterinarian asked. The old man did not answer. His attention was entirely on Rex, on the dog he had not touched in 7 years, the dog he had watched through the fence for 2 years without ever finding the courage to approach. His fingers found the bandana, still tied to Rex's collar. Torres's bandana. His hand began to shake. Prescott pushed forward, his radio already in his grip. "I am calling the police. This man is a trespasser and clearly mentally unstable. He is probably the reason this dog has been so aggressive. God knows what he has been doing out here." Wait. Nina's voice surprised even herself. But when she looked at the old man kneeling in the dust, at the precise way he held his shoulders even in that humble position, at the unconscious parade rest in his posture, she saw something the security captain had missed entirely. "Just wait. Let Dr. Chen examine what just happened here." Prescott rounded on her. "You do not give me orders. I run security at this facility, and I'm telling you this vagrant is leaving in handcuffs." Rex growled, low and warning, positioning himself between the old man and Prescott. It was the first time in 6 months the dog had protected anyone at all. And standing at the back door, Director Margaret Holloway watched in silence, her coffee growing cold in her hands, as everything she thought she knew about the homeless man behind her facility began to crumble. The word hung in the air like smoke. Aram, a command in Pashto, a language spoken in the mountains of Afghanistan, where this dog had spent 4 years of his life. A language that had no business coming from the mouth of a homeless man in a VA parking lot in Virginia. Yet Rex had responded to it instantly, dropping from killer to supplicant in the space of a single breath, and now he pressed against the old man's legs with his eyes half closed, making a sound deep in his chest that was almost like purring. Dr. Chun had not moved. The syringe still hung at her side, forgotten, as she watched the impossible scene before her. In 18 years of veterinary medicine, 12 of them working with military K9s, she had never seen anything like this. Dogs bonded to their handlers with a loyalty that bordered on the absolute. When those handlers died, the dogs grieved in ways that broke the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. Some recovered. Some did not. Rex had been one of the ones who did not, his grief curdling into aggression, his loyalty transforming into a refusal to accept anyone else. Until now. I asked you a question. Captain Prescott's voice cut through the silence, hard and demanding. He had moved closer, his hand still on his radio, his eyes fixed on the old man with undisguised contempt. "How did you do that? What did you say to that animal?" The old man did not look up. His attention remained on Rex, his scarred fingers moving through the dog's fur with a gentleness that seemed almost painful to witness. "Just a word," he said. His voice was rough and used to conversation, But beneath the hoarseness there was something else. A precision. A cadence. Just a word he knows. Prescott snorted. Right? A magic word. You expect me to believe this mutt understands Afghan? Pashto. The correction came soft but immediate. And he understands it because he was trained to understand it. Because I trained him to understand it. The silence that followed was absolute. Nina took a step forward, her tablet forgotten, her eyes moving between the homeless man and the dog with growing comprehension. Dr. Chen's grip on the syringe loosened. Even Director Holloway, still standing in the doorway, felt her breath catch in her throat. Prescott laughed. It was a harsh sound, brittle with disbelief. You trained him. You. He gestured at the old man's stained jacket, his torn pants, the boots held together with duct tape and wire. Let me guess, you were a Navy SEAL too. Maybe a Green Beret. Every homeless guy who walks through here has the same story. Secret missions. Classified operations. The voice dropped to a mocking sneer. I have heard all before, old man. Every lie in the book. The old man said nothing. His hand continued its slow movement through Rex's fur, finding the spot behind the ears that made the dog lean into him, the spot that only a trainer would know. But something had changed in his posture. The humble stoop of his shoulders had straightened almost imperceptibly. His eyes, when they finally rose to meet Prescott's, held a steadiness that made the security captain take an unconscious step backward. I trained him, the old man repeated. 7 years ago, at Lackland. And I trained the man who handled him. The man who died. Before Prescott could respond, a memory surfaced unbidden in the old man's mind, rising like a bubble through dark water. Lackland Air Force Base, 2017. A young soldier, standing at attention in the Texas heat, sweat running down his face, his new K-9 partner sitting rigidly at his side. Staff Sergeant Elijah Torres, 23 years old, fresh from handler school, terrified and trying not to show it. This command stays between you and your dog. The old man heard his own voice in the memory, younger, stronger, carrying across the training yard. Nobody else hears it. Nobody else knows it. It is your private language. The bond that nobody can break. Torres had nodded, his hand finding Rex's head, his eyes filled with a determination that would carry him through 4 deployments and 847 detections and 1,000 moments of mortal danger. You are his family now. The younger version of himself had continued. And he is yours. You take care of each other. That is the only rule that matters. The memory faded. The old man found himself back in the present, kneeling in the dust of a VA courtyard, holding a dog who had lost his family and found his first trainer after 7 years of separation. Nina had moved closer while he was lost in the past. She was young, early 20s, with kind eyes and a VA identification badge that marked her as an orderly. Her tablet was in her hands now, fingers moving across the screen. What did you say your name was? She asked quietly. The old man hesitated. Names meant records. Records meant questions. Questions meant explaining things he had spent 2 years trying to forget. His name does not matter. Prescott stepped forward again, emboldened by the old man's silence. What matters is that he is trespassing on federal property. He's been living behind our dumpster like a rat for months, and I want him gone. He keyed his radio. Security to main courtyard. I need an escort for a trespasser. Rex's growl returned. Low. Warning. The dog had positioned himself squarely between the old man and the security captain, his body tense, his eyes tracking Prescott's every movement. It was not the mindless aggression of the past 6 months. It was something older, something trained, a dog protecting his handler. Captain, Dr. Chen's voice was calm but firm. Perhaps we should discuss this before you call for backup. This man just did something none of us could do. He calmed Rex. He stopped him from attacking me. Do you not think that deserves at least a conversation? Prescott's face reddened. What I think is that this facility has rules. What I think is that we do not let random vagrants wander onto property and interfere with medical procedures. What I think is that I have seen 100 men like this one, claiming service, claiming sacrifice, and every single one of them was a liar looking for a handout. The old man flinched. It was a small movement, barely visible, but Nina caught it. She saw the way his jaw tightened, The way his hands stilled on Rex's fur. The way something flickered behind his eyes that looked almost like shame. But he did not defend himself. He did not argue or protest or offer proof. He simply knelt there in the dirt, holding a dog that should have been dead by now, letting the accusations wash over him like rain. This was what told Nina more than anything else. A liar would have fought back. A fraud would have produced explanations, justifications, a rehearsed story designed to generate sympathy. But this man simply absorbed the abuse in silence, his dignity somehow intact despite the filth of his clothes and the tangle of his beard. His only response a slight straightening of his spine that spoke of decades of training so deep it had become reflex. She looked back at her tablet. Her fingers had found the military K-9 training database, the public records of handler graduation classes. She typed in Lackland, 2017, Torres. The search results appeared, and there, in a photograph taken 7 years ago, was a young Staff Sergeant Elijah Torres standing beside his new K-9 partner. And behind them, his hand on Torres' shoulder, was a face she recognized despite the years and the beard and the weight loss and the suffering. Her breath caught. "Captain Prescott," she said. Her voice was strange to her own ears. Distant. "I think you should look at this." But Prescott was not listening. He had grabbed the old man's arm and was trying to haul him to his feet. Rex's growl had risen to a snarl. The dog's teeth were bared, and in the doorway, Director Holloway had finally begun to move. "Wait," Dr. Chin shouted. "Let me see his hands." Everyone froze. The old man looked down at his own hands, at the scars that crisscrossed his knuckles and palms, at the marks that told a story 40 years in the making. Bite scars. Training scars. The permanent record of a life spent teaching dogs to become warriors and teaching men to become their partners. Slowly, he turned his palms upward, and in the silence that followed, Captain Prescott saw what everyone else had already begun to understand. The scars told a story that no words could match. 40 years of stories, written in white ridges and puckered tissue across palms that had once been smooth. Dr. Chun stepped closer, her clinical eye tracing the patterns. Bite marks, dozens of them, layered over each other in a map of encounters with military working dogs across 4 decades. The distinctive puncture pattern of a Malinois canine. The tearing marks of a German shepherd's grip. The older, faded scars from breeds and training methods that had not been used since the 1980s. "These are not defensive wounds," she said quietly. "These are training scars. The kind you get when you're teaching bite work, when you're the one wearing the sleeve." Prescott's grip on the old man's arm loosened slightly, confusion replacing certainty on his face. "That does not prove anything. Anyone could have worked with dogs at some point. Not like this." Dr. Chin shook her head. "I have seen these patterns before. Only on the old trainers. The ones who came up through Lackland when they still did live bite training on the handlers themselves." She looked at the old man with new eyes. "That practice ended in 1991, which means you have been doing this for at least 35 years. The old man said nothing, but he did not pull his hand away. Nina pushed forward, her tablet extended. "Captain Prescott, you need to see this." Her voice carried an edge now, something harder than the quiet orderly who fed Rex through the kennel door. "I found a graduation photo from Torres's handler class. Lackland, 2017. Prescott barely glanced at the screen. "So what? A photograph does not mean anything. Look at who is standing behind Torres." For a moment, Prescott did not move. Then, reluctantly, his eyes dropped to the tablet in Nina's hands. The photograph showed a young Staff Sergeant Elijah Torres, his hand resting proudly on Rex's head, his face bright with the accomplishment of completing K-9 handler training. Behind him stood a row of instructors in fatigues, and at the center of that row, his hand on Torres' shoulder, was a man with close-cropped gray hair and the unmistakable bearing of a career soldier. The face was cleaner then, the body fuller, the eyes unclouded by 2 years of sleeping behind dumpsters and eating from trash cans. But the bone structure was the same. The set of the jaw was the same. And when Nina zoomed in on the instructor's hands, visible at his sides, the same constellation of scars marked his palms. Prescott's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, doubt, and then, stubbornly, denial. This could be anyone. This could be doctored. Do you know how easy it is to fake photographs these days? The old man finally spoke. His voice was tired, resigned, carrying the weight of a man who had stopped expecting to be believed long ago. Sergeant First Class Wendell Okonkwo, K-9 training instructor, Lackland Air Force Base. Retired 2020 after 32 years of service. The name landed like a stone in still water. Nina's fingers flew across her tablet, searching, verifying. Dr. Chin's expression shifted from curiosity to something approaching recognition. Even Director Holloway, who had been approaching slowly from the doorway, stopped in her tracks. Only Prescott remained unmoved. Words, he spat. Just words. Anyone can claim a name. Anyone can make up a service record. Around them, the courtyard had begun to fill. Word had spread through the facility the way it always did, carried by orderlies and nurses and the patients themselves. A crowd had gathered near the doors, veterans in wheelchairs and on crutches, staff members in scrubs and administrative badges, all of them watching the confrontation unfold. Among them was an old man in a faded army cap, his wheelchair pushed by a tired-looking nurse, his eyes fixed on the scene before him with an intensity that made his hands tremble on the armrests. Rex had not moved from his position between Okonkwo and Prescott. The dog's growl had subsided to a low rumble, constant and warning, his body angled to intercept any threat. It was a textbook protection stance, the kind that took months of training to instill, the kind that only emerged when a dog recognized his handler as someone worth protecting. If you're who you claim to be, Prescott said, his voice rising for the benefit of the watching crowd, then you should have no problem proving it. Show me your military ID. Show me your discharge papers. Show me something besides a sob story and some scars. Okonkwo's eyes dropped to the ground. I do not have them anymore. Of course you do not. Prescott's laugh was sharp, triumphant. Because they do not exist. Because this whole thing is an act designed to get sympathy, maybe a bed for the night, maybe some money from people too gullible to see through your lies. The words hit Okonkwo like physical blows. His shoulders hunched. His hands, still extended, began to lower. And for a moment, watching him, Nina felt her heart crack. Because she could see what Prescott could not. She could see the shame in the old man's posture, the resignation, the bone-deep exhaustion of someone who had stopped believing he deserved to be treated as human. Captain, Director Holloway's voice cut through the tension, calm and authoritative. That is enough. Prescott spun toward her. Director, this man is a trespasser. He has been living on our property for months. I have tried to remove him multiple times and been overruled every time. Now he is interfering with a medical procedure and making wild claims about training military dogs. I'm doing my job. Holloway's eyes moved from Prescott to Okonkwo to Rex, still pressed against the old man's legs. I watched what happened from my window, she said quietly. I saw that dog try to attack Dr. Chin. I saw this man speak one word and stop it. She paused. Whatever else is true, that happened. I saw it with my own eyes. A trick, Prescott insisted. Some kind of whistle or sound we cannot hear. These homeless types have all kinds of schemes. From the crowd, a voice spoke. Thin and reedy, but carrying the unmistakable tone of command that decades of service had ingrained. That was not a trick. Everyone turned. The old veteran in the wheelchair had pushed himself forward, his nurse tried to hold him back, his faded army cap askew on his head. His eyes were locked on Okonkwo with an intensity that bordered on desperation. I know that word, he continued. Aram, peace, calm. He drew a shaking breath. I learned it 40 years ago, at Lackland, from my instructor. The crowd had gone silent. Prescott's mouth opened, then closed. Dr. Chun took an unconscious step backward. The old veteran's wheelchair rolled forward another foot. His hand rose, trembling, pointing at Okonkwo. I know this man. His voice cracked. He trained me. Class of 1984. He was the youngest instructor they had ever had, and the hardest. We called him the Dog Whisperer before that was even a thing. Okonkwo's head came up slowly. His eyes met the old veteran's across 20 feet of courtyard, across 40 years of time, across a gulf of memory that suddenly seemed very small. "Corporal Reeves," he said softly, "you had a German shepherd named Baron. You could not get him to release on command for the first 3 weeks. I made you run laps until you figured it out." The old veteran's face crumpled. Tears began to stream down weathered cheeks. "That is him," he said to no one and everyone. "That is Sergeant Okonkwo, the man who taught me everything I knew." Prescott's face had gone pale. His hand dropped from his radio. But his eyes, when they found Okonkwo again, still held defiance. "One person," he said. "One old man who could be in on the whole thing. That does not prove anything." "Then let me prove it," Okonkwo said quietly. "Let me show you what I taught Rex. What I taught Torres. What no one else in the world knows." He raised his hand. Rex's attention locked onto him instantly, every muscle quivering with anticipation. And Okonkwo gave a command that made every veteran in that courtyard hold their breath. The hand signal was complex, 3 distinct movements flowing into one another, fingers forming shapes that meant nothing to the untrained eye, but everything to the dog watching with absolute focus. Rex responded before the final gesture was complete. He sat. He lay down. He rolled onto his back, exposing his belly in the ultimate display of submission and trust. Then, at a slight flick of Okonkwo's wrist, he sprang to his feet, circled behind the old man, and sat again at his left heel in perfect position. The entire sequence took 4 seconds. It was flawless. Dr. Chen exhaled slowly. That was an advanced protection sequence. I have seen handlers work for months to get that kind of response. She looked at Okonkwo with something approaching awe. He did it like he has been waiting his whole life to do it again. "He has," Okonkwo said quietly. His hand found Rex's head, fingers scratching the spot behind the ears. "This is what he was trained for. This is who he is." He just forgot for a while. After Torres, the name fell into the silence like a stone into deep water. Torres, Staff Sergeant Elijah Torres, the handler who had died in Helmand Province 6 months ago, whose absence had transformed Rex from decorated hero to dangerous liability, whose bandana still hung from the dog's collar, carrying a scent that faded more each day. Prescott had not spoken since the demonstration. His face had gone through several shades of color, settling finally on a mottled red that spoke of humiliation and fury barely contained. But he had not retreated, had not apologized, had not admitted that perhaps he had been wrong about the homeless man kneeling in the dust of his courtyard. Director Holloway stepped forward. "Mr. Okonkwo." Her voice was gentle, the voice of someone who had spent decades working with broken veterans. "You said you trained Torres, that you were there when he died." The words hit Okonkwo like a physical blow. His hand stilled on Rex's fur. His eyes, which had been almost peaceful during the demonstration, clouded with something dark and heavy. "I was there," he said. The words came slowly, painfully, dragged up from a place he had tried to bury for 6 months. "I was consulting on 8K9 program in Kandahar, advising on detection training for the Afghan handlers. Torres was assigned as my liaison." A memory rose unbidden. The smell of dust and diesel fuel. The weight of body armor in 40-degree heat. A young staff sergeant with an easy smile and a dog who never left his side. "He was good," Okonkwo continued. "One of the best I ever trained." Rex trusted him completely. They had a bond that you do not see very often. The kind that goes beyond training, beyond commands. Something deeper. His voice cracked. He paused, gathering himself, while the crowd watched in silence. "What happened?" Nina asked softly. She had moved closer, her tablet forgotten, her eyes fixed on the old man with an intensity that had nothing to do with verification or proof. Okonkwo closed his eyes. "October 14th. We were running a convoy escort from Kandahar to a forward operating base near Lashkar Gah. Route 611, known IED corridor. Rex was working point, checking the road ahead. Torres was right behind him. The memory sharpened, colors becoming vivid, sounds becoming clear, the rumble of engines, the crunch of gravel under tires. Rex's focused trot as he swept the road for explosives. We had cleared a culvert about 3 clicks from the base. Rex gave the all clear. Torres waved us forward. And then, he stopped. His jaw tightened. Rex, sensing the shift in his handler's emotional state, pressed closer against his leg. Secondary device, Okonkwo said finally. Buried deeper than the first. Triggered remotely when the convoy was in the kill zone. The first explosion took out the lead vehicle. The second one, his hand moved to his neck, touching a scar that disappeared beneath his collar. The second one was meant for Rex. For the dog who had found too many of their bombs. Who had saved too many American lives. Torres saw it before anyone else. Saw the wires. Saw the trigger. And the words would not come. They lodged in his throat like broken glass. He covered Rex with his own body. Corporal Reeves said quietly from his wheelchair. The old veteran's voice was steady, carrying the weight of understanding that only another soldier could provide. He took the blast meant for his dog. Okonkwo nodded, could not speak. His hand had found the bandana on Rex's collar, Torres's bandana, and his fingers gripped it like a lifeline. The shrapnel tore through his vest. He managed finally. Severed the femoral artery. I got to him in maybe 30 seconds. Held pressure. Called for medic. But there was too much blood. Too much damage. He drew a shaking breath. He died in my arms, asking me to take care of Rex, making me promise I would not let them put him down, that I would find him a home, a purpose, something to live for. The courtyard had gone absolutely still. Even Prescott had stopped fidgeting, his face frozen in an expression that might have been shock or might have been the first crack in his certainty. I promised him, Okonkwo said. I looked him in the eyes and I promised. And then he was gone, and Rex started howling. This sound I had never heard from a dog before, like his heart was being torn out through his throat. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. The gesture left a streak of dirt across his cheek. They had to sedate Rex to get him off Torres's body. He would not leave him, would not stop trying to drag him to safety, even though there was no safety left, even though Torres was already gone. Nina had tears running down her face. Dr. Chun had turned away, her shoulders shaking. Even Director Holloway's composed expression had cracked, revealing the grief beneath. I came home with the body, Okonkwo continued, attended the funeral, watched them fold the flag and hand it to his mother. And then I found out Rex had been sent here, to this facility, for rehabilitation. His eyes swept the courtyard, the buildings, the fence he had watched through for 2 years. I could not face him, could not look at him and see Torres dying all over again. So I stayed outside, watched from the fence, made sure he was being taken care of, told myself that was enough, that keeping my distance was better for both of us. He laughed, a broken sound without humor. I told myself I was honoring my promise by watching, by being nearby. But the truth is I was a coward. I let my guilt keep me from the one thing Torres asked me to do. I let Rex suffer alone because I could not handle my own pain. Rex whimpered, his nose pushed against Okonkwo's palm, seeking contact, offering comfort to the man who had trained him and lost him and found him again. And then today, Okonkwo said, today I saw Dr. Chan with a needle, saw what was about to happen, and I realized that if I let him die without trying, I would be breaking the last promise I ever made to Torres. The only thing he asked of me with his dying breath. He looked down at Rex, at the dog who had lost everything and somehow found his way back. So I stopped hiding, he said quietly, and I spoke the word I taught him 7 years ago. The word that means peace. That means safety. That means his handler is here and everything is going to be okay. His voice broke on the last word. I just hope I'm not too late. The silence that followed Okonkwo's confession stretched across the courtyard like a held breath. Veterans in wheelchairs wiped their eyes with trembling hands. Staff members stood frozen, clipboards and tablets forgotten at their sides. Even the autumn wind seemed to have stilled, as if the world itself was waiting to see what would happen next. Director Holloway was the first to move. She crossed the courtyard with measured steps, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel, and stopped 3 feet from where Okonkwo knelt with Rex pressed against his side. Her face held an expression that was difficult to read. Grief, certainly, but something else too, something that looked almost like recognition. Sergeant Okonkwo, she said quietly. I owe you an apology. Okonkwo looked up, confusion flickering across his weathered face. You do not owe me anything. I do. Holloway's voice carried the weight of admission. I knew you were out there, behind the fence. I saw you watching Rex through the chain link almost every day for the past 2 years. She paused. I should have done something. Should have reached out. Instead, I told myself it was not my place to interfere, that you would come forward when you were ready. Her eyes moved to Rex, to the calm that had settled over the dog like a blanket. I almost let him die because I was too afraid to push. Before Okonkwo could respond, Prescott stepped forward. His face had regained some of its color, and with it, some of its belligerence. This is very touching, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Really, a beautiful story, but does not change the facts. Captain, Holloway's tone carried a warning. The facts are that this man has been trespassing on federal property for months, Prescott continued, bulldozing over her objection. The facts are that he interfered with a scheduled medical procedure. The facts are that we have only his word for any of this. He gestured at the crowd of watching veterans. One old man in a wheelchair who claims to remember him from 40 years ago. Some scars that could have come from anywhere. A photograph that proves nothing. Nina stepped forward, her tablet clutched to her chest. I found his service record, she said. Her voice was quiet but steady. Sergeant First Class Wendell Okonkwo. 32 years at Lackland Air Force Base. Over 600 handler teams trained. Legion of Merit. Meritorious Service Medal. Army Commendation Medal with 4 oak leaf clusters. Prescott waved dismissively. Online records can be faked. Do you know how many stolen valor cases we see here every month? These people are professionals at manufacturing credentials. Then call Lackland. The voice came from Dr. Chun, who had been standing silent since Okonkwo's revelation. Call the K-9 Training Command. Ask them about Sergeant Okonkwo. If he is lying, they will tell you in 5 minutes. Prescott's jaw tightened. That is not the point. Then what is the point, Captain? Director Holloway's patience had finally cracked. A man just told us he watched his student die in his arms. He just explained why a dog we were about to euthanize has been uncontrollable for 6 months. He just demonstrated a level of training expertise that none of us have ever seen. And your response is to keep insisting he must be a fraud. My response is to follow protocol. Prescott's voice had risen, carrying across the courtyard. My response is to maintain security at this facility. My response is to not let every sad story override the rules that keep this place running. He pointed at Okonkwo, who had risen slowly to his feet, Rex still pressed against his leg. This man is homeless. He has been living behind our dumpster. He is clearly mentally unstable. And now you want to just hand him a dangerous animal and let him walk away. What happens when he has an episode? What happens when the dog attacks someone else? What happens when this whole thing blows up and we're left explaining to the news cameras why we gave a trained weapon to a vagrant? The word hit Okonkwo like a slap. Vagrant. He had been called many things over the past 2 years. Bum. Hobo. Trash. But something about that word, spoken in that tone, in front of all these people, cut deeper than the others. Rex felt the change. The dog's body tensed, a low growl building in his chest. His eyes locked on Prescott with an intensity that made several staff members step backward. Easy, Okonkwo murmured. His hand found Rex's head, steadying him. Easy, boy. He is not worth it. Prescott laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it now. See, the dog is still dangerous. Still aggressive. One word from this man, and he could tear my throat out. Is that what we want? Is that the kind of liability we are willing to accept? From his wheelchair, Corporal Reeves spoke up. That dog is not dangerous. His voice was stronger now, carrying the authority of experience. He is protecting his handler, the way he was trained to do, the way Sergeant Okonkwo taught him to do 40 years before he ever trained Rex. Prescott rounded on the old veteran. You do not have any authority here. You are a patient. Your job is to take your medication and attend your therapy sessions, not to interfere with security matters. The words landed like a blow. Reeves flinched, his weathered face crumpling with humiliation. The nurse behind him placed a protective hand on his shoulder. Captain Prescott. Director Holloway's voice had gone cold. That is enough. I'm just stating facts. You are bullying a patient in front of witnesses. After spending the last 20 minutes publicly humiliating a veteran whose service record puts yours to shame. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a level that only Prescott could hear. I have tolerated your attitude because you are efficient at your job. But if you say one more word to Corporal Reeves or Sergeant Okonkwo, I will have your badge before the end of the day. Prescott's face went pale. Director, I was only trying to. One more word. Holloway's eyes were steel. I mean it. The security captain's mouth snapped shut. His hands clenched at his sides. But he said nothing. Holloway turned back to Okonkwo, her expression softening. Sergeant, I cannot undo the last 2 years. I cannot change what happened to Torres or what you have been through since. But I can offer you something now. She gestured toward the facility, toward the buildings that Okonkwo had watched from outside the fence for so long. Come inside. Let us get you something to eat, somewhere to clean up, and then let us talk about Rex, about what he needs, about what you need. Okonkwo hesitated. His eyes moved from Holloway to the crowd of watching veterans to Prescott's furious, silent face, then down to Rex, who looked up at him with an expression that was almost pleading. I do not know if I can, he said quietly. I do not know if I deserve. He could not finish the sentence. But Holloway understood. Nobody gets what they deserve, Sergeant. She extended her hand, palm open. But sometimes we get a second chance anyway. Rex whimpered softly, his nose pushed against Okonkwo's palm, urging him forward. And for the first time in 2 years, Wendell Okonkwo took a step toward the door. The door to the facility loomed before Okonkwo like the entrance to another world. He had watched this door for 2 years, had seen staff members pass through it 1,000 times, had memorized the rhythm of its opening and closing, had imagined what lay beyond it during long nights behind the dumpster when sleep would not come. But he had never walked through it, had never allowed himself to believe he had the right. Rex pressed against his leg, a warm and steady presence. The dog had not left his side since that first command in the courtyard, as if afraid that any distance between them might cause his trainer to vanish again. Okonkwo understood the feeling. He had spent 6 months afraid to close that same distance, and now that it was gone, he could not imagine how he had survived without it. Director Holloway held the door open. Take your time, she said. There is no rush. Behind them, the crowd had begun to disperse. Staff members returned to their duties, though many cast lingering glances over their shoulders. Veterans wheeled themselves back toward the common areas, several of them nodding to Okonkwo as they passed, silent acknowledgments from men who understood what it meant to carry invisible wounds. Corporal Reeves had been taken back inside by his nurse, but not before catching Okonkwo's eye and offering a trembling salute that nearly broke him. Only Prescott remained in the courtyard, standing alone near the spot where Rex had almost been euthanized. His face was a mask of controlled fury, his hands clenched at his sides, his eyes tracking Okonkwo's every movement. He did not speak. Director Holloway had made the consequences of speaking very clear, but his silence was loud enough. Okonkwo stepped through the door. The interior of the facility was nothing like he had imagined. He had expected institutional coldness, the sterile efficiency of government buildings he remembered from his years of service. Instead, he found warmth, soft lighting, walls painted in calming earth tones, photographs of veterans with their families, their service dogs, their fellow patients, a bulletin board covered with thank you cards and recovery milestones and announcements for group therapy sessions. It looked like a place where healing happened. The thought made something twist in his chest. Nina appeared at his elbow, her tablet still in hand. I could show you to the cafeteria, she offered. Or, if you would rather clean up first, we have shower facilities for patients and visitors. Okonkwo looked down at himself, at the stained jacket and torn pants, at the boots held together with wire, at the hands that had not been properly washed in weeks. Shame flooded through him, hot and suffocating. I should not be here, he muttered. I'm going to get everything dirty. I'm going to. Sergeant. Holloway's voice was gentle but firm. You are a veteran who served this country for 32 years. You trained the handlers who protected our soldiers overseas. You have more right to be here than anyone. She gestured toward a hallway branching off from the main corridor. Nina will take you to the showers. We will find you some clean clothes. And when you are ready, we will talk. Okonkwo hesitated. Rex looked up at him, brown eyes patient and trusting. What about him? Okonkwo asked. I do not want to leave him alone. Not after. He could not finish the sentence. Not after everything. Not after 2 years of watching through a fence. Not after almost losing him forever. Rex can come with you, Holloway said. She smiled, the first real smile Okonkwo had seen from her. I suspect he is not going to let you out of his sight anyway. The shower room was empty when they arrived. Nina showed him where the towels were kept, where to find soap and shampoo, how to adjust the water temperature. She did it all without condescension, without the pity that Okonkwo had learned to expect from people who saw his circumstances. Just practical help, offered with quiet efficiency. I will be right outside, she said. Take as long as you need. The door closed behind her. Okonkwo stood alone in the tiled room, Rex sitting at his feet, and for a long moment he did not move. Then he caught sight of himself in the mirror. The man staring back at him was a stranger. Gaunt face beneath a tangled beard. Hollow eyes ringed with exhaustion. Skin weathered by 2 years of exposure to elements that should never have touched him. He looked old, broken. Nothing like the instructor who had stood tall before hundreds of handler teams. Nothing like the soldier who had served with pride for 3 decades. He looked like someone who had given up. Rex whimpered. The dog rose and pressed his head against Okonkwo's thigh, offering comfort without understanding why it was needed. I know, boy. Okonkwo's voice was barely a whisper. I know. He turned on the water. The heat hit him like a benediction. He could not remember the last time he had felt hot water on his skin. The shelters had showers, but they were always lukewarm at best, and the lines were long, and there were so many others who needed them more. He had learned to make do with cold hoses behind gas stations, with wet wipes stolen from restaurant bathrooms, with the rain when it came. But this was different. This was warmth that seeped into muscles he had forgotten he had. That loosened knots of tension he had carried for months. That washed away layers of grime and shame and self-neglect until he could almost see the man he used to be beneath. He stayed under the water until it began to cool. Then he dried himself with a towel that was soft and clean and smelled like laundry detergent instead of mildew. He found the clothes that Nina had left outside the door. Simple things. A gray t-shirt, sweatpants, a pair of slippers. Nothing fancy, but they were clean. They were his size. They were given freely, without expectation. He put them on and looked in the mirror again. Still gaunt, still hollow-eyed, still bearing the marks of 2 years of self-imposed exile. But cleaner now, more human. Rex stood and shook himself, as if he too had been refreshed by his handler's transformation. Okay, Okonkwo said quietly. He took a deep breath. Okay. He opened the door. Nina was waiting as promised. Her eyes moved over him, taking in the change, and something like relief flickered across her face. Director Holloway is in her office, she said. She asked me to bring you there when you were ready. Okonkwo nodded. He took a step forward, Rex at his heel. And then he stopped. At the end of the hallway, visible through a window that looked out onto the main corridor, Captain Prescott stood with his phone pressed to his ear. His back was to them, but his posture was rigid with intent, and though Okonkwo could not hear the words, he could read the tension in every line of the man's body. Prescott was not done. Whatever Director Holloway had threatened, whatever consequences he faced, he was not willing to let this go. Okonkwo watched him for a long moment. Then he turned to Nina. Who is he calling? He asked quietly. Nina's face tightened. I do not know, she admitted, but I do not think it is anyone who wants to help you. Director Holloway's office was smaller than Okonkwo had expected. A wooden desk covered with orderly stacks of paperwork. Bookshelves lined with medical texts and framed photographs. A window overlooking the courtyard where, less than an hour ago, he had stopped Rex from being killed. The room smelled of coffee and old books and something floral, maybe lavender, that reminded him of places he had not been in a very long time. "Please sit." Holloway gestured to a chair across from her desk. "Rex can stay with you." Okonkwo lowered himself into the chair carefully, as if afraid it might break beneath him. Rex settled at his feet, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but alert. The dog had not truly relaxed since the courtyard. Neither had his trainer. Holloway studied him for a moment before speaking. "I made some calls while you were cleaning up," she said. "Lackland, the K-9 Training Command. A few contacts I have from my years in Army nursing." Okonkwo's hands tightened on the armrests. And everything you said checks out." She leaned back in her chair. "Sergeant First Class Wendell Okonkwo. 32 years of service. Over 600 handler teams trained. The current program director at Lackland remembers you. Said you trained him when he was a young specialist fresh out of basic." Something loosened in Okonkwo's chest, a tension he had not realized he was holding. He had spent so long being disbelieved, dismissed, treated as just another homeless man with delusions of significance. That verification of his own identity felt almost surreal. "He also said you retired in 2020, Holloway continued. "After a training accident that was not your fault, but that you blamed yourself for anyway." The words hit him like ice water. His breath caught. Rex lifted his head, sensing the shift in his handler's emotional state. "Lieutenant Damian Kershaw," Holloway said quietly. "Class of 2018. Killed in Kandahar, October 2019. One of yours." Okonkwo could not speak. His throat had closed around the name, around the memory of another young handler he had trained, another life he had failed to protect. Kershaw had been like a son to him, brilliant with dogs, patient, intuitive, the kind of handler who came along once in a generation. And now he was dead, just like Torres, just like too many others. "You were there when he died too," Holloway said. "It was not a question. You were consulting on the same program, same convoy route, same ambush tactics." Okonkwo nodded. The movement felt mechanical, disconnected from his body. "That is why you left," Holloway continued. "Not because of a training accident. Because you lost two handlers you loved like sons in the span of a year. Because you could not face training anyone else knowing you might lose them too." The silence stretched between them. Outside, a bird called from somewhere in the facility's small garden. Rex whimpered and pressed closer to Okonkwo's leg. "I trained 412 handlers who deployed to combat zones," Okonkwo said finally. His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. 47 of them died. 47 men and women I taught, I mentored, I watched graduate and ship out to wars I could not follow them into." He looked down at his hands, at the scars that mapped 4 decades of service. "I went to every funeral, every single one. I stood in the back and watched their families receive flags, and I told myself it was not my fault, that I had done everything I could. That war is war, and people die, and there is nothing one instructor could do to change that." His jaw tightened. But Torres and Kershaw were different. "I was there. I was in the convoy. I watched them die, and I could not do anything to stop it. Could not throw myself between them and the blast. Could not trade my life for theirs. I just held them while they bled out and promised them things I could not deliver." He looked up at Holloway, and his eyes were wet. "I promised Kershaw I would take care of his mother. I promised Torres I would take care of Rex. And then I came home, and I fell apart. I lost my wife because I could not stop seeing their faces. Lost my apartment because I stopped going to work. Lost everything because the guilt was so heavy I could not carry it, and anything else at the same time." Holloway did not speak. She simply listened, her face composed, her eyes filled with an understanding that came from decades of working with broken warriors. "I ended up on the streets because I believed I deserved to be there," Okonkwo continued. "Because I had failed the men who trusted me. Because I could not face Rex knowing I had let his handler die. Because every time I looked at him through that fence, I saw Torres asking me to take care of his dog, and I knew I was breaking my promise." He drew a shaking breath. "I told myself I was watching over him, keeping my distance for his own good. But the truth is I was hiding, running from the one thing Torres asked of me, because facing it meant facing what I had lost." Rex rose and placed his head on Okonkwo's lap. The weight of it, the warmth, the unconditional acceptance, broke something loose in the old man's chest. Tears began to fall, sliding down weathered cheeks into the gray beard he had not trimmed in months. And then today, he said, I saw Dr. Chun with that needle. I saw what was about to happen, and I realized that if I let Rex die, I would be killing the last piece of Torres that still existed in this world. The last piece of Kershaw, too, because Rex was trained the same way I trained all of them, with the same commands, the same bond, the same love. His hand found Rex's head, fingers threading through fur that was softer than he remembered. I could not let that happen, even if it meant coming out of hiding, even if it meant facing Prescott and his accusations, even if it meant standing in that courtyard and telling everyone what I had done, what I had failed to do. He looked at Holloway with red-rimmed eyes. I did not know if I can ever forgive myself for the last 2 years, for watching Rex suffer while I hid behind a dumpster feeling sorry for myself. But I know I cannot hide anymore. I made a promise to a dying man, and it is time I kept it. Holloway was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the desk and placed her hand over his. Sergeant Okonkwo, she said softly, what happened to Torres and Kershaw was not your fault. What happened to you afterward, the guilt, the isolation, the homelessness, that was not your fault either. That was trauma doing what trauma does, breaking us down until we cannot see any way forward. She squeezed his hand. But you did see a way forward. Today, when it mattered most, you stepped out of the shadows and you saved Rex's life. And in doing so, you kept your promise to Torres. Okonkwo shook his head. 2 years too late. Maybe. Holloway's voice was gentle but firm. Or maybe exactly on time. Because Rex needed you today. Not 2 years ago. Today. And you were there. Before Okonkwo could respond, the door to the office burst open. Nina stood in the doorway, her face pale with alarm. Director Holloway, she said. Captain Prescott just called the military police. He is claiming Sergeant Okonkwo is a stolen valor case who attacked him in the courtyard. They are sending a unit to arrest him. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Military police. Stolen valor. Arrest. Okonkwo felt the room tilt around him, felt the walls closing in, felt every instinct screaming at him to run, to disappear back behind the dumpster where no one could find him, where no one could hurt him, where he could fade into the invisibility that had protected him for 2 years. But Rex was pressed against his leg, and running would mean leaving Rex behind. He stayed in his chair. Director Holloway rose slowly, her face hardening into something Okonkwo had not seen before, an anger cold enough to burn. How long? She asked Nina. 10 minutes. Maybe 15. Nina's voice trembled. He called from outside the building. I only heard because one of the orderlies overheard him bragging about it to another security guard. Holloway moved around her desk with purpose. Where's Prescott now? Still outside, near the parking lot. He is waiting to meet them when they arrive. The director nodded once, sharply. Stay with Sergeant Okonkwo. Do not let anyone in this room until I return. She was gone before Nina could respond, her footsteps echoing down the corridor with a speed that belied her age. The door swung shut behind her, leaving Okonkwo alone with Nina and Rex and the terrible weight of what was coming. I should go, Okonkwo said quietly. His voice sounded distant to his own ears. If I leave now, through the back, they will not find me. Prescott gets what he wants. You do not get caught in the middle. Everyone wins. Nina shook her head fiercely. No, you're not running. Not after everything that just happened. You do not understand. Okonkwo's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against his thighs to still them. If they arrest me, they will put Rex back in the kennel. They will go ahead with the euthanasia. Everything I did today will mean nothing. Then we make sure they do not arrest you. How? His voice cracked. I have no identification. No proof of who I am beyond what Director Holloway found online. Prescott is telling them I attacked him. His word against mine. A security captain against a homeless man. We both know how that ends. Nina was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled out her phone. I recorded everything, she said. In the courtyard. From a moment you stepped out of the shadows until Director Holloway took you inside. Every word Prescott said. Every accusation. Every time he grabbed you or threatened you or called you a liar. She turned the screen toward him. The video was paused on an image of Prescott's hand closed around Okonkwo's arm, his face twisted with contempt. "He assaulted you," Nina continued, "in front of witnesses, on camera, and he is claiming you attacked him." Okonkwo stared at the screen, at the evidence of his own humiliation, preserved in digital clarity. He should have felt relief. Instead, he felt only exhaustion, a bone-deep weariness that went beyond physical fatigue. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. Nina lowered the phone. Her eyes met his with an intensity that surprised him. "My grandfather was a Vietnam veteran," she said quietly. "When he came home, nobody wanted to hear what he had been through. Nobody wanted to help. He ended up on the streets for 3 years before my grandmother found him and brought him home." Her voice tightened. "He told me stories about the men he served with, about the things they did to survive, about coming home to a country that treated them like criminals for following orders. He said the worst part was not the war. It was the loneliness afterward, the feeling that nobody cared whether he lived or died." She looked at Rex, then back at Okonkwo. "I see veterans come through this facility every day," she continued. "Men and women who gave everything they had and got nothing in return, who fell through the cracks, who ended up alone and forgotten. And I promised myself I would never let that happen to someone if I could stop it." Her jaw set with determination. "You are not going to be forgotten, Sergeant Okonkwo. Not today. Not while I am here." Before Okonkwo could respond, the sound of Ray's voices filtered through the closed door. He recognized Holloway's voice, sharp with authority, and another voice, deeper, unfamiliar. Official. The military police had arrived. Okonkwo's heart rate spiked. Rex felt the change and rose to his feet, positioning himself between his handler and the door. The dog's body was tense, his ears forward, his eyes locked on the entrance with predatory focus. "Easy," Okonkwo murmured. His hand found Rex's head. "Whatever happens, you stay calm. You do not give them any reason to call you dangerous. You understand me." Rex whimpered, but did not move. The voices grew louder, closer. Okonkwo could make out fragments now. Holloway saying something about jurisdiction. Another voice, Prescott's, insisting on immediate action. A third voice, calm and professional, asking for clarification. Then the door opened. A military police officer stood in the threshold. Young, maybe late 20s, clean-shaven with a hard jaw and eyes that had seen things. He wore the uniform crisp and proper, and his hand rested on his sidearm with the casual readiness of someone who had used it before. "Sergeant Okonkwo," he said. His voice was neutral, betraying nothing. "I am Corporal Vasquez. I need you to come with me." Behind him, Prescott's face appeared, wearing an expression of barely concealed triumph. "I told you," he said, impersonating a soldier, assaulting a federal employee. "This man belongs in a cell." Okonkwo rose slowly. Rex pressed against his leg, growling low. Corporal Vasquez's eyes dropped to the dog. He studied Rex for a long moment, studied the tactical vest still bearing the faded stencil of his name, studied the Purple Heart insignia on the collar. "That is a decorated military working dog," Vasquez said quietly. Was Prescott interjected. "He has been decommissioned, scheduled for euthanasia." This man interfered with the procedure. Vasquez ignored him. His attention remained fixed on Rex, on the way the dog positioned himself, on the textbook protection stance that spoke of years of professional training. Then his eyes moved to Okonkwo, to the scars on his hands, to the way he stood, unconsciously at attention despite everything, to the whistle hanging around his neck on a worn cord. "That whistle," Vasquez said. "Where did you get it?" Okonkwo's hand rose to touch it. "Lieutenant Damian Kershaw," he said quietly. "Class of 2018. He gave it to me the day he graduated handler school. Said I'd taught him everything he knew." Vasquez went very still. "Kershaw," he repeated. The name came out strange, almost reverent. "Damian Kershaw, killed in Kandahar. October 2019. Yes." The corporal's face had changed, the professional neutrality cracking, revealing something underneath, something that looked almost like recognition. "I served with him," Vasquez said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "He was my squad leader. He saved my life 3 weeks before he died. The room went silent. Prescott's triumphant expression faltered. His eyes darted between Vasquez and Okonkwo, calculating, reassessing. And the military police corporal who had come to arrest a homeless man slowly removed his hand from his weapon. "Tell me," he said to Okonkwo. "Tell me everything." Okonkwo told him everything. He told him about Lackland, about 32 years of training handlers and their dogs, of watching young soldiers transform into teams that moved like single organisms, of sending them off to wars knowing some would never return. He told him about the commands he developed, the private languages between handler and K9 that no enemy could decode, the bonds he forged that death itself could not fully break. He told him about Kershaw, about the young lieutenant who had arrived at training with more natural talent than anyone Okonkwo had seen in decades, about the way Kershaw talked to his dog like a partner, not a tool, about the graduation ceremony where Kershaw had pressed a whistle into his instructor's hand and said, "You taught me what it means to be trusted by something that cannot lie." He told him about the convoy, Route 611, the culvert they had cleared twice, the secondary device buried deeper than the first. He told him about watching Kershaw see the trigger before anyone else, about the way the young lieutenant had thrown himself sideways, about the sound the explosion made when it tore through body armor and flesh and bone. Vasquez listened without interrupting. His face had gone pale, his jaw tight, his eyes glistening with moisture he refused to let fall. Behind him, in the doorway, Director Holloway and Prescott stood frozen. The security captain's triumphant expression had crumbled into something uncertain, something that looked almost like fear. "I held him for 90 seconds, Okonkwo said. His voice had gone flat, mechanical, the voice of a man reciting facts he had rehearsed in nightmares for years. He told me to take care of his mother, to tell her he loved her, to make sure his dog found a good home. His hand found the whistle around his neck. Then he was gone, and I came home with his body. And I stood at his funeral, and I promised his mother I would check on her every month, that I would make sure she was okay." Vasquez's voice was hoarse. "Did you? For 6 months." Okonkwo's eyes dropped to the floor. Then Torres died. Same convoy route, same ambush tactics, same explosion, same 90 seconds of holding a young man while his life drained away. The parallel hit Vasquez like a physical blow. He took a step backward, steadying himself against the doorframe. "After that I could not do it anymore," Okonkwo continued. "Could not face Mrs. Kershaw, knowing I had failed another one of my boys. Could not face anyone. I stopped going to work, stopped answering the phone. My wife left because I would not talk to her about what happened. I lost the apartment a month later." He looked up at Vasquez with eyes that held nothing but exhaustion. "I ended up on the streets because that is where I belonged, with the other broken things. The other failures, the other men who could not carry what they had been given." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Rex had gone still, his head resting on Okonkwo's foot, his eyes closed. Prescott cleared his throat. "This is all very touching," he said. His voice had lost its earlier confidence, but stubbornness remained. "But it does not change the facts. This man was trespassing. He interfered with a medical procedure. Shut up." The words came from Vasquez, quiet but carrying an edge that made Prescott flinch. "I am a federal employee," Prescott sputtered. "You cannot." I said shut up. Vasquez turned to face him fully, and something in his expression made the security captain take a step backward. "You call me here to arrest a decorated veteran, a man who trained the soldier who saved my life, a man who held my squad leader while he died." His hand moved to his chest, where dog tags hung beneath his uniform. "Lieutenant Kershaw talked about his instructor at Lackland," Vasquez continued. "Called him the best trainer he had ever known. Said the man had a gift for seeing what dogs and handlers could become before they saw it themselves. Said he owed everything to someone named Okonkwo." He turned back to face the old man in the chair. "I never got to thank you," he said quietly, "for what you gave him, for who you helped to become. He saved 4 lives before he died. Mine was the last." Okonkwo could not speak. His throat had closed around emotions too large to contain. "You're not under arrest," Vasquez continued. He reached into his pocket, and produced a card. "This is my personal number. If anyone," he glanced at Prescott, "give you trouble, you call me. I will be here in 10 minutes. Director Holloway stepped forward. "Corporal Vasquez, I have video evidence that Captain Prescott physically assaulted Sergeant Okonkwo in the courtyard, that he publicly accused him of stolen valor despite mounting evidence to the contrary, that he called military police with a false report." Prescott's face went white. "Now wait just a minute. I would like to file a formal complaint," Holloway continued, ignoring him, "against Captain Prescott for abuse of authority, harassment of a veteran, and filing a false report with military police." Vasquez nodded slowly. "I will need to see that video." Nina stepped forward, phone extended. "It is all here. Every word, every threat, every time he grabbed Sergeant Okonkwo or called him a liar." Vasquez took the phone. He watched in silence as the video played, his expression growing harder with each passing moment. When Prescott's voice came through the speaker, calling Okonkwo a vagrant, calling him trash, demanding he be removed like garbage, something shifted in the corporal's eyes. "Captain Prescott," Vasquez said when the video ended. His voice was ice. "You're going to come with me." "What?" Prescott's voice cracked. "I did not do anything wrong. I was protecting this facility. I was doing my job. You filed a false report. You assaulted a veteran. You attempted to have a decorated soldier arrested on fabricated charges." Vasquez pocketed the phone. "That is not doing your job. That is criminal misconduct." Prescott looked around wildly, searching for support that was not there. Director Holloway's face was stone. Nina's eyes held nothing but contempt. Even the orderlies who had gathered in the hallway watched with expressions of grim satisfaction. "This is not over," Prescott hissed. He pointed at Okonkwo. "You think you have won something here. You are still nothing. Still homeless. Still a failure." "I will." Corporal Vasquez's hand closed around Prescott's arm. The grip was not gentle. "You have the right to remain silent," Vasquez said. "I strongly suggest you use it." As Prescott was led away, still sputtering protest that no one was listening to, Okonkwo sat in his chair and tried to process what had just happened. He had come into this building expecting to be arrested, expecting to lose Rex forever, expecting to fade back into the invisibility that had been his only protection for 2 years. Instead, he had found recognition, validation, justice. Rex lifted his head and placed it on Okonkwo's lap. The dog's tail wagged once, twice, as if he understood that something had shifted, that the long nightmare was finally ending. Okonkwo's hand found Rex's fur, and for the first time in 2 years, he let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he deserved to be found. The news spread through the facility like wildfire. By the time Corporal Vasquez had escorted Prescott to his vehicle, half the staff and most of the veteran patients had heard some version of what happened. The homeless man behind the dumpster was a legend. The security captain who had tormented him was in handcuffs. The dog scheduled for death was alive because of a command spoken in a language from the other side of the world. Director Holloway had cleared her schedule for the rest of the day. She sat across from Okonkwo in her office, a fresh pot of coffee between them, and laid out options with the same calm efficiency she brought to everything. "We have emergency housing on site," she explained. "Small apartments for staff and special cases. One of them is empty. It is yours if you want it." Okonkwo shook his head slowly. "I cannot just." "You can." Holloway's voice was firm but kind. "You served this country for 32 years. You trained the men and women who protected our soldiers overseas. You have earned more than a bed, Sergeant. But we can start there." Before Okonkwo could protest further, a knock came at the door. Nina entered, her face flushed with excitement. "Director," she said, "there is someone here to see Sergeant Okonkwo." "From Lackland?" Holloway's eyebrows rose. "Already. He flew in from San Antonio. Said he got on a plane the moment he heard." She stepped aside, and a man in his early 40s entered the room. He wore civilian clothes, but his bearing was unmistakably military. Close-cropped hair going gray at the temples. Sharp eyes that swept the room with practiced assessment. A handshake grip, when he extended it toward Okonkwo, that spoke of decades of discipline. Sergeant Okonkwo, he said. His voice carried a Texas drawl, softened by years of command. I do not know if you remember me. Specialist Marcus Webb. Class of 2003. Okonkwo stared at him. The name surfaced slowly from the depths of memory. A young soldier with more enthusiasm than skill. A German shepherd named Atlas who had trouble with scent discrimination. Weeks of extra training sessions, early mornings and late nights, until something finally clicked. Webb, he said quietly. You could not get Atlas to differentiate between explosive compounds. I made you run the course blindfolded until you learned to trust his nose more than your eyes. Webb's face split into a grin. That is the one. He pulled out his phone. I am Colonel Webb now, Program Director at Lackland. I run the whole K-9 Training Command. The words took a moment to register. The young specialist who had struggled with basic scent work was now in charge of the entire program Okonkwo had given his life to. When I heard what happened here, Webb continued, I got on the first flight out, called in some favors, made some inquiries. He paused, his expression growing serious. I also made a few other calls. What kind of calls? Webb glanced at Director Holloway, who nodded. He pulled a chair closer to Okonkwo and sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. The K-9 training program has changed since you left, he said. We have got new protocols, new equipment, new everything. But one thing has not changed. We still produce handlers who go to war, and some of them still do not come home. Okonkwo flinched. The words cut too close to wounds that had never healed. The handlers who do come home, Webb continued, they struggle. PTSD, survivor's guilt, all the things you know too well. And the dogs, the ones who lose their handlers, they struggle too. We have been looking for someone who understands both sides, who can help the handlers heal and help the dogs find new purpose. He met Okonkwo's eyes directly. I want to offer you a position. Consultant for our handler reintegration program. You would work with veterans transitioning out of the K-9 units. Help them process what they have been through. And you would work with the dogs who have lost their handlers. Help them find new bonds, new reasons to keep going. Okonkwo could not speak. The offer was too large to process, too far from the reality he had inhabited for 2 years. An hour ago, he had been hiding behind a dumpster. Now he was being offered a job, a purpose, a way to turn his guilt into something that might actually help. I'm not qualified, he managed finally. I have been living on the streets. I have not worked with dogs in years. I am. You're the most qualified person alive. Webb's voice was fierce. You trained 600 handler teams. You understand the bond between dog and handler better than anyone I have ever known. And you understand what happens when that bond is broken because you have lived it. He gestured toward Rex, still pressed against Okonkwo's leg. Look at what you did today. You saved a dog that every expert had given up on. You reached him when no one else could. You did that after 2 years of living on the streets, after losing everything, after all the guilt and pain and isolation. Imagine what you could do with resources, with support, with a team behind you. Okonkwo looked down at Rex. The dog looked back at him with eyes that held something like hope. What about him? Okonkwo asked quietly. What happens to Rex? Webb smiled. He is yours. Officially. I already filed the paperwork. Sergeant Rex is being transferred to your custody as a therapy and support animal. He'll be part of the program too. Proof that even the most broken among us can find our way back. The words landed like a benediction. Yours. After 2 years of watching through a fence, after 6 months of failing his promise to Torres, after all the guilt and shame and self-imposed exile, Rex was finally his. Okonkwo's hand found the dog's head. Rex leaned into the touch, his tail wagging slowly, his eyes closing with contentment. I do not know if I can do this, Okonkwo said. His voice was thick with emotion. I do not know if I'm strong enough. You do not have to be strong, Webb said quietly. You just have to show up. The strength comes from the work, from the dogs, from the handlers who need someone who understands. He stood and extended his hand again. What do you say, Sergeant? Ready to come home? Okonkwo looked at the hand, at Webb's face, at Director Holloway's encouraging nod, at Nina standing in the doorway with tears streaming down her cheeks. Then he looked at Rex. at the dog who had lost everything and found him anyway, at the last piece of Torres still walking this earth. He thought of Kershaw, of the 47 handlers who had not come home, of the promises he had made and broken and might finally have a chance to keep. He took Webb's hand. "Yes," he said. His voice cracked on the word. "Yes, I am ready." Rex's tail wagged faster. And somewhere, Okonkwo could almost believe Torres and Kershaw were smiling. The apartment was small. A single room with a bed, a desk, a tiny kitchenette, and a bathroom barely large enough to turn around in. The walls were painted a neutral beige. The window looked out over the facility's garden, where veterans sat on benches and walked careful laps on paved paths. It was nothing like the home Okonkwo had shared with his wife before everything fell apart. Nothing like the quarters he had occupied at Lackland during his decades of service. It was perfect. Rex explored every corner with his nose, cataloging scents, mapping territory, claiming space that was finally his own. When he finished his inspection, he circled 3 times on the rug beside the bed and laid down with a sigh that seemed to release years of tension. Okonkwo sat on the edge of the mattress and watched him. The bed was soft, too soft after 2 years of concrete and cardboard. But he did not complain. He simply sat and breathed and tried to believe that this was real. A knock came at the door. Nina entered carrying a cardboard box filled with supplies. Toiletries, she explained, setting it on the desk. Some basic clothes, stuff from the donation closet. Director Holloway said she will take you shopping tomorrow for anything else you need. Okonkwo shook his head. "This is too much. You have all done too much already." Nina smiled. "Get used to it, Sergeant." She glanced at Rex, who had lifted his head at her entrance but made no move to rise. "He looks comfortable." "First time in 6 months," Okonkwo said quietly. "Maybe longer." Nina pulled the desk chair around and sat facing him. "Can I ask you something?" Okonkwo nodded. "The command you used. Aram, you said you created private languages for each handler and their dog. Languages no one else knew." She leaned forward, curiosity bright in her eyes. How did Rex know that word if Torres learned a different language? Okonkwo was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "When I started training handlers, I realized that the bond between dog and handler was sacred, private, something that belonged only to them. So I developed a system. Each team learned their own set of commands, words from different languages, signals that no enemy could decode." He reached down and scratched behind Rex's ears. "But there was one command I taught every team. One word that was universal. A reset. Something any handler could use if they encountered one of my dogs in the field, even if it was not their own partner. Aram," Nina said. "Aram. Peace. Calm. Safety." It meant that whoever spoke, it was part of the family. Part of the brotherhood of handlers and dogs that I had trained. It meant you could trust them. His voice grew thick. Torres knew that word. Kershaw knew it. Every handler I ever trained knew it. It was my signature, my gift to them. A way of saying that no matter where they went, no matter what happened, they were never truly alone. Nina wiped her eyes. "That is beautiful." It was supposed to be, Okonkwo said. But when Torres died, when Kershaw died, that word became something else. It became a reminder of everyone I had lost, everyone I had failed to protect. He looked at Rex. When I spoke it today, it was the first time in 2 years I'd said it out loud. And Rex remembered. After everything he had been through, after 6 months of grief and rage and isolation, he still remembered what it meant. "Because it meant you," Nina said softly. "It meant his first trainer. The one who taught him everything before Torres." Okonkwo nodded. "And maybe," he said quietly, "it meant that Torres was still with him somehow. In the training, in the bond, in the word that connected all of us across time and distance and death." Rex lifted his head and placed it on Okonkwo's knee. The gesture was so familiar, so achingly similar to what he used to do with Torres, that Okonkwo had to close his eyes against the wave of emotion. The next morning, word came about Prescott. Director Holloway delivered the news personally, standing in the doorway of Okonkwo's apartment with a cup of coffee in each hand. "Captain Prescott has been formally charged with filing a false police report, assault, and conduct unbecoming a federal employee. His employment has been terminated effective immediately. There will be a hearing next month, but based on the video evidence, his career is finished. Okonkwo took the offered coffee, but said nothing. He had expected to feel satisfaction at the news, vindication, perhaps even triumph. Instead, he felt only a hollow sadness. He was wrong about me, Okonkwo said finally. But he was not entirely wrong about homeless veterans. Some of them do lie. Some of them do have problems that make them dangerous. He was trying to protect the facility in the only way he knew how. Holloway shook her head. He was trying to protect his own ego, his own sense of power. The facility was just an excuse. She sat down in the desk chair Nina had used the night before. I have known men like Prescott my entire career, she continued. Men who see vulnerability as weakness, who treat anyone beneath them as less than human. They hide behind rules and protocols, but what they really want is control. The ability to decide who matters and who does not. Her eyes met Okonkwo's. You matter, Sergeant. Every veteran who comes through these doors matters. And anyone who forgets that has no business working here. The coffee was warm in Okonkwo's hands. Rex had risen and was pressing against his leg, a constant presence, a reminder that he was no longer alone. What happens now, he asked. Now you heal. Holloway smiled. You spend time with Rex. You let Colonel Webb's team set up the consulting position. You take it one day at a time. She stood and moved toward the door, then paused. There's one more thing. Corporal Vasquez called this morning. He wants to visit, to talk about Kershaw. He said he has stories he thinks you want to hear. Okonkwo's throat tightened. Stories about the young lieutenant he had trained. The young man who had saved lives before losing his own. The young man whose whistle still hung around his neck. Tell him yes, Okonkwo said quietly. Tell him I would like that very much. Holloway nodded and left. Okonkwo sat in the silence of his small apartment, Rex warm against his leg, sunlight streaming through the window onto the garden outside. Veterans walked the paths below, some alone, some with nurses, some with dogs of their own. He watched them move through the morning light, these broken men and women finding their way back to wholeness. And for the first time in 2 years, he allowed himself to imagine that he might find his way back too. 2 months later, Okonkwo stood at the front of a room filled with veterans and their dogs. The space had been converted from an unused therapy wing into something new. Padded floors for the animals. Comfortable chairs arranged in a circle for the handlers. Windows that let in natural light and looked out over the garden where, not so long ago, Okonkwo had watched from behind a fence and tried to convince himself that distance was the same as protection. Rex sat at his heel, calm and alert, his tactical vest replaced with a therapy dog harness bearing his name and the Purple Heart insignia he had earned in service. The aggression that had nearly cost him his life was gone now, channeled into purpose, transformed by the presence of the man who had trained him and found him and refused to let him go. 12 veterans sat in the circle, some young, barely out of their 20s, already carrying the weight of things they had seen and done. Some older, gray-haired and weathered, still fighting battles that had ended decades ago. Each of them had a dog at their feet. Retired military working dogs. Shelter rescues trained for therapy. Animals who had found their way to broken humans who needed them. My name is Wendell Okonkwo, he began. His voice was stronger now than it had been 2 months ago. Steadier, still rough around the edges, but no longer hoarse with disuse. I spent 32 years training military working dogs and their handlers at Lackland Air Force Base. I trained over 600 teams. 47 of those handlers were killed in action. The room was silent. The dogs, sensing the shift in emotional energy, pressed closer to their humans. I was present for 2 of those deaths, Okonkwo continued. I held both of those young men while they died. I made promises to them that I failed to keep. And for 2 years after, I lived on the streets because I believed I did not deserve anything better. He looked around the circle, meeting eyes that held recognition. Understanding, the shared knowledge of what it meant to carry weight that no one else could see. I'm not here to tell you that healing is easy, he said. It is not. I'm not here to tell you that the pain goes away. It is not. I'm still learning how to live with what I lost, how to forgive myself for the things I could not change, how to wake up in the morning and believe that the day ahead is worth facing. Rex shifted, pressing his head against Okonkwo's thigh. The gesture was instinctive now, a bond rebuilt through weeks of shared space, and quiet mornings and long walks through the facility gardens. But I am here to tell you that you do not have to carry it alone, Okonkwo said. That is what these dogs are for. That is what this room is for. That is what we are for. Each other. He knelt down, bringing himself to Rex's level, his hand finding the familiar spot behind the dog's ears. This is Rex. Sergeant Rex. Military working dog number 4721. He has 847 explosive detections. For combat deployments. A Purple Heart. He saved more lives than anyone will ever be able to count. His voice softened. He also lost his handler 6 months before I found him again. He spent those 6 months in a cage, attacking anyone who came near, grieving in the only way he knew how. They were going to euthanize him. They said he was too dangerous, too broken, too far gone to save. Okonkwo looked up at the circle of veterans. They were wrong. He was not too far gone. He was waiting for someone who understood, waiting for someone who spoke his language, waiting for someone who knew that beneath the aggression and the fear and the pain, there was still a good dog who had given everything he had and just needed someone to give something back. He stood slowly, Rex rising with him. That is why we are here, he said, because none of you are too far gone either, because the things you are carrying, the guilt and the grief and the rage, those are not signs that you are broken beyond repair. Those are signs that you love something, that you gave something, that you are human. A young veteran in the corner wiped his eyes. An older man gripped his dog's collar like a lifeline. The dogs know, Okonkwo continued. They always know. They do not care about your rank or your record or your mistakes. They do not care how many times you have fallen apart. They just want to be with you, to help you, to give you a reason to keep going when you cannot find one on your own. He smiled, and it was a real smile, the first one that had come easily in longer than he could remember. So that is what we are going to do here. We are going to learn from them. We're going to let them teach us how to trust again, how to connect, how to take the next step even when we cannot see where the path leads. Rex barked once, a sharp sound that broke the tension and drew surprised laughter from several of the veterans. And occasionally, Okonkwo added, we're going to let them remind us that it is okay to make noise, to take up space, to be alive. After the session ended, after the veterans had filed out with their dogs, after the room had emptied and the afternoon light had gone golden through the windows, Okonkwo walked with Rex to the garden. They followed the paved path past benches where patients sat reading or talking or simply staring at the sky, past flower beds tended by volunteers, past a fence where, 2 months ago, Okonkwo had spent 2 years watching and hiding and hating himself. He stopped at a bench near the memorial wall, bronze plaques bearing names of veterans who had passed through this facility and found peace, or at least found something close to it. Torres was not on this wall. Neither was Kershaw. They had their own memorials in other places tended by other hands. But Okonkwo had requested permission to add something here. A small plaque at the bottom of the wall where it could be seen by anyone who sat on this bench. For the handlers and their dogs. For the bonds that death cannot break. For those still carrying the weight. You're not alone. He sat on the bench. Rex settled at his feet. The autumn sun was warm on his face, and somewhere in the facility he could hear laughter. Veterans. Staff. Dogs barking. Life continuing. Still here, brother, he said quietly. The words were for Torres. For Kershaw. For all 47 handlers who had not come home. Still trying. Rex lifted his head and placed it on Okonkwo's knee. The weight was familiar now. Comforting. A reminder that promises could be kept, even when they were kept late. Even when they were kept imperfectly. Even when the keeping of them required losing yourself first. He looked out over the garden, at the veterans walking their dogs, at the staff moving between buildings, at the world that had seemed so unreachable when he had been watching from the other side of the fence. He was not fixed. He knew that. The grief was still there. The guilt still surfaced in quiet moments. The faces of Torres and Kershaw still visited him in dreams. But he was not hiding anymore. He was not running. He was here, in this garden, with this dog, doing the work that he had been trained to do his whole life, helping others find their way back. If you connected with this story, if it reminded you that even the most broken among us can find purpose again, we would love to hear from you. Subscribe to our channel and share in the comments. Have you witnessed the bond between a veteran and their canine? Have you seen someone written off as hopeless prove everyone wrong? Sometimes the ones who need saving the most end up saving everyone around them. Thank you for watching.